This week's parsha of Shoftim, the Torah tells us there's an obligation to install a bezdin, a court comprised of 23 dayanim in every community, which is comprised of minimally 120 individuals. In addition to the 23 judges who are all smuchim, they carry the ordination of Moshe Rabbeinu, and they're fully proficient in all aspects of Torah. You have law enforcers. These are the Shoftim. They have to be installed in every community. Then it concludes V'shoftu mishpat tzedek, and they will judge the people a judgment which is righteous, an equitable judgment. So Rashi cites the Sifri. What does it mean? V'shoftu mani dayanim mumchim v'tzadikim. Firstly, you have to appoint judges who are proficient, fully qualified, judges of caliber, v'tzadikim, and they're righteous. Lishbot tzedek, because if they're not righteous, they may be qualified in terms of their qualification, but if they're not honest, the judgment is going to be a corrupted judgment. So they have to be v'shoftim mishpat tzedek. So via the Balaturim writes v'shoftu osios uposhut. The letters of v'shoftu, they shall judge. Psst, psst. Are the same letters of poshut, means simple. What is this alluding to? V'shoftu yichova v'lecho din shel poshut l'dagdebo k'din shel me'amona. That you shouldn't differentiate. Let's say a judge, he has a case which he has to make a decision of $1,000 or $10,000. Say that's worthwhile. That one should pay attention to, because the verdict has great ramifications. But what about Seshava Pruta? Let's say something which is a cent. So insignificant. Is it really worthwhile to apply yourself to bring about the end result, which is Mishpat Tzedek? V'shoftu, that even it's something of such an inconsequential matter, poshut, it's something simple, you cannot differentiate. Now, what's the reason? Why exactly does the judge, why isn't he in a position to offer a judgment? Is it based on the value, or is it based on his responsibility as a judge? The Rambam rules that if a person steals as little as a penny, he's in violation of gzela, of stealing, Torah violation. If a person is a damager, whether you damage something which is $1,000 or one cent, you're a damager. It's just a question of what the obligation of restitution is. The restitution, is it 1,000 or is it the cent? But in terms of the liability, it's the same liability to the damager. It's no different. But in the mind of the judge, in terms of what's worthwhile, this is worthwhile, that's not worthwhile. This is significant, this is insignificant. So what is the issue? The issue is the person applies his own value system to what he's responsible to address. Torah says that can't be. V'shoftu om nishpat tzedek, v'shoftu even poshut. That you cannot differentiate between something of greater value or something of enormous value to something which is almost insignificant, inconsequential. Doesn't make a difference. That's v'shoftu, that's what it's alluding to. That the letters of v'shoftu is poshut. So I was thinking, in the portion of Ekev, it says V'yekev Tishmun. If you will listen, it could have said V'ye Tishmun. What's Ekev Tishmun? So over there, Rashi cites the Midrash, Ima mitzvos hakalo shadum doshva kevev Tishmun. That if one is observant and is meticulous, that even regarding the mitzvahs that one tramples on with his heel, Ekev is the heel, one who doesn't pay attention even to those mitzvahs, then he will be worthy of all the blessings, unlimited blessings, and bounty of Hashem. So, we once discussed why. Why, if a person doesn't differentiate between the simple mitzvah and the more severe mitzvah, the more serious mitzvah, that he even addresses and takes responsibility, full responsibility, for the mitzvah that's abused, that's neglected, then he's worthy of everything. Why? And it says the bracha is endless. Every aspect of the person's life will be unlimited in terms of blessing. Why? So we explained, the question is, why does a person differentiate between a more severe mitzvah and a less severe mitzvah? It's always a question of, is it worthwhile? Is it worthwhile? You look at the upside, look at the downside. A person says a negative commandment is seen as something more serious than not performing a positive commandment. Lo say, you shall not, carries a certain degree of liability, and it's quantified. Person violates, transgresses a negative commandment, it has a liability of lashes, even if it's done without an action, but it's still within the same classification. It's a negative commandment. Positive commandments, I'll have less reward. Does it really make a difference? But let's say Korban Pesach. Even though Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, is a positive commandment, but if one doesn't bring the Paschal Lamb, if one doesn't have himself circumcised, has a liability of spiritual excision. So there, we can relate to the seriousness of not addressing that positive commandment. But if one doesn't say Shema, one doesn't say the Kriya Shema, accepts the yoke of heaven in its proper time, within a certain period of time in the morning, and if you miss it once in a while, is it the end of the world? It's a mitzvah saseh. So based on a person's own evaluation of what's more important, what's less important, that will determine to what degree does he apply himself. Why? Because everything is based on what? On self-gain or loss. That's the scale of evaluation. But again, why is one obligated to observe a mitzvah and to perform the mitzvah? Mitzvah, the root of the word mitzvah is tzivui. It's a commandment. It's a dictate. God dictates, you must say Shema. God dictates, you must bring the Paschal Lamb, the Korban Pesach. If it's God's dictate, it's totally irrelevant whether the liability is spiritual excision or it's to a lesser degree. So what is the basis for the person addressing the mitzvah? Is it because God said you must? As a subject of Hashem, therefore I adhere to His word? If that's the case, that's what we call lishma. You're doing the mitzvah for the sake of the mitzvah. But those people, although they may believe and they convince themselves they do the mitzvah for the sake of a mitzvah, but why are they really doing the mitzvah at a certain level? It's for self-gain. And how do you determine whether you truly do it for the sake of the mitzvah or the sake of God or for your own sake? If you make differentiations between what's more important and what's less important. If you make differentiations, it's clear you're not doing the mitzvah for the sake of God. Because if you would, how do you make differentiations? God said whether it's more or less, they're all important. So if the impetus of being committed to the mitzvah is the Dvar Hashem, because it's the word of God, how do you make differentiation? So that's an indication. It's not truly, although you may be convinced that you're doing it for the sake of God, it's clear it's not for the sake of God. You mean one thing, you say one thing, but you mean something else at maybe a subconscious level. And that is the litmus test, whether you truly lishma. If a person unilaterally, he doesn't differentiate between the mitzvah kal and mitzvah chamura, therefore that's an indication that he's committed to do whatever his responsibility is as a Jew. But if he makes differentiations, that itself is an indication that it's not what he believes or what he's convinced, but rather it's purely for self-gain. And his yardstick is his own determination, his own evaluation. The Shoftim, what has to be the perspective of the judge? Even Poshut. It has nothing with your glory, what you consider valuable, what you consider not valuable. What's significant, what's inconsequential. God says, the Shoftim, even Poshut, even the inconsequential ruling, it doesn't make a difference because it's only a cent versus $10,000. It doesn't make a difference. It's mishpat tzedek. God wants there should be justice. Justice is that if it's injustice, and therefore justice is not being served, it's the same thing. The issue is what are you accomplishing? What are you putting forth? Are you putting forth truth? So it's interesting. David HaMelech writes over there in Akev, Lama ira b'meiro. Well, I'm afraid, I am fearful on the day of Ra, I mean the day of judgment. Abon akeva yisubuni. I'm concerned the sins of my heels will encircle me, will be there to prosecute me. Yizbarach shmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu shenosan Torah liYisrael sheish b'm sheish meos u'shlosh meos shlosh esrei mitzvos. God, the Blessed One, the Holy One, who gave the Torah to Klal Yisrael, which contains 613 mitzvos. Yesh ben kalos v'chamuros. Within the Torah there are less severe, more severe mitzvos. Because there are less severe mitzvos, people are not really observant of them. They literally, in the vernacular, throw them under the heels. They trample on them. It's not worth their while. Therefore, David was fearful of the day of judgment. I'm not concerned and worried that maybe I did not fulfill the more serious mitzvah. Because they're so severe. What am I fearful of? From the lesser severe mitzvos. Maybe I transgressed one of them. I'm not sure. Did I not? Why? What was the basis? Why did I transgress them? Why did I neglect them? Because I evaluated them, it's not that significant. But you said, you should be no less careful in the mitzvah kala as the mitzvah chamura. The less severe mitzvah as the mitzvah chamura. Now, why did Hashem say you should be careful at the mitzvah kala and mitzvah chamura? If God gave us a dictate that you must observe seemingly the less severe mitzvah, evidently it has value. It directly connects and has relevance to your spirituality, to meet the objective of your existence. The halacha is, we've just read in last week's portion, you're not permitted to add to the Torah, you're not permitted to detract from the Torah. Bal tosif, bal tigra. Not adding, not. Now, but if a mitzvah kala is insignificant, and if you say, I'll do one less mitzvah, it's kala. So if a person neglects the mitzvah because he feels it's insignificant, it's inconsequential, it has a semblance of bal tigra. In your Torah, the 612, the primary mitzvahs that we understand, kashrus, Shabbos, the laws of family purity, Yom Kippur, these are significant. Others are less significant. What do you mean they're less significant? If that's the case, the Torah is not comprised of 613. It's Torah Hashem Timima. That God's Torah is complete. Complete means it has to be all, the mitzvahs have to be intact. And the reason why they have to be intact, we've mentioned many times the name of Rav Chaim Vital, that just as there's 613 mitzvahs in the Torah, there's Ramach Mitzvah Saseg, there are 248 positive commandments, there are 248 components of the Jewish soul, and there's a correlation between the Mitzvah Saseg and the Neshama, and the soul. And just as the physicality of the body has to be nourished and sustained in the physical sense, the neshama has to be sustained in the spiritual sense. And when we do a mitzvah, that mitzvah sustains that aspect, that component of the neshama, the soul. So if that's the case, significant, insignificant, but factually, your spirituality has to be maintained in its totality. So, and that's why God gave it. So therefore you can't detract. It has to be in its totality. And that's why Hashem's Havizor b'mitzvah kala b'chamura. Evidently, if God transmitted the mitzvah, and you're obligated to observe it, how could you say it's not important? If God said, evidently it is important. L'kach Omar, therefore David says, Loma iro b'meiro. Why should we be fearful in the day of judgment? Avon akevi subuni. I'm concerned that the sins of my heels are encircling me. Gemara tells us in Avodah Zarah, tractate Avodah Zarah, that a person on Rosh Hashanah, which is the Day of Judgment, he should not say the Musaf service as an individual during the first 3 hours of the day. If you pray with a minyan, with a quorum, it's okay. Because we speak, you have a schus hatzibur, you have the merit of the tzibur, of the congregation. But as an individual, to pray the Musaf service, that you should not. Of course, what is Musaf? We want to be seen and evaluated in the best vein. We have Zichronos, we want to be remembered in the best vein. And since it's the most intense time of judgment, the first 3 hours of the day, therefore, unless you're within the context of a quorum, a minyan, you should not daven privately during the first 3 hours. So the Gemara asks, when the Gemara speaks about God's schedule throughout the day, it says what does God do during the first 3 hours of the day? Yoshev v'lomi Torah. He studies Torah. When does he judge the world? That's the second 3 hours of the day. So if that's the case, he should not pray as an individual, not as part of a minyan, the second 3 hours. Why the first 3 hours? So our answer is because when God studies Torah, what is Torah? It cites a verse in Mishlei and Proverbs, Emes kenev al timkor. Acquire truth, do not sell it. You cannot compromise on truth. Truth is unadulterated. When God studies Torah, that's the most intense level of judgment. God doesn't in any way look away. The evaluation is exacting. And because it's so exacting, but why is it so exacting? Because as he's studying Torah, Torah is emes. Emes is what? Is exact truth. It's unadulterated, uncompromised truth. That's what it is. So the eyeglass or the scale which God uses to evaluate one's actions are going to be with that degree of accuracy, with that exactness. Therefore, you shouldn't pray as an individual without the schus hatzibur, only during the second 3 hours. Because that's when God, that's mishpat. Mishpat is not necessarily emes. Many other things contribute to a verdict. When God studies Torah, it's emes. It's interesting. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz. God created the world. Bereshis. We've mentioned this Chazal endless, numerous times, but it's such a basic, fundamental perspective in existence, in our existence. Bishul Torah shenikras reishis, bishul Yisrael shenikras reishis. For the sake of Torah and for the sake of the Jewish people, who are the only nation in the world in existence who have relevance, who have a capacity to be involved and attached to that system, to the Torah system. Because that's their degree, that's the dimension of spirituality. We are the descendants of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the holy patriarchs. They developed and advanced their spiritual systems that we, of all creation, we are the only people who have relevance to this dimension of holiness, which is the Torah itself. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz, b'shul Torah shenikras reishis, b'shul Yisrael shenikras reishis. The Torah is the ultimate, is the choicest. The Jews are the chosen, the choicest people. Therefore, there's this compatibility between Torah and Klal Yisrael. Okay? Now, what is Torah? Torah is emes. Torah is truth. So, how does the Jew have to live his life? Within which context? If Torah has relevance only to the Jew, not to the world, so what level of detail and exactness does a Jew have to serve God? Within the context of Torah. If Torah is emes, and you have to live within Torah, so evidently you have to live within the context of truth, of emes. So it means like this. A human being, even a Jew, we're all subject to the evil inclination. We have blind spots. But we must acknowledge, in terms of what our objective is, and what the perspective is, and what the aspiration is, and understanding what our reality is we have to persevere to achieve perfection. There's a famous Rabbi Yonah, we read in Har Evel and Har Gerizim, they stood on the mountain, half of Klal Yisrael, tribes on one mountain, 6 tribes on another mountain. The Levium, the Levites were between the 2 mountains. They turned to one mountain. They said, Baruch Asher Yokim es divrei HaTorah zos, or Asher lo Yokim es divrei HaTorah zos. Blessed is the one who upholds the Torah. Cursed is the one who doesn't uphold the Torah. So the commentators, the early commentators explain, does it mean to say a person who doesn't say Shema, he's cursed, chas v'shalom. Person speaks Lashon Hara, speaks negatively of ill of another person, fellow Jew, he's subject to oror of Asher lo Yokim. Asher lo Yokim is divrei HaTorah. He's not upholding the Torah because Torah says you're not permitted or you must. So they explain, what is a person who doesn't uphold the Torah? Let's say a person says that, I'm a 612 mitzvah Jew. The 613th mitzvah I feel has no relevance, no application to myself. That's oror asher lo yokim. He's not acknowledging the reality of what his responsibility of Torah is. If a person doesn't observe, that's one thing. We're not perfect. We're not perfect as human beings, even as Jews. But the question is, what is our obligation? What do you acknowledge as your obligation? I acknowledge my obligation is 612 mitzvos. That's Torah. I acknowledge the Torah is what God gave us. What did God give us? 613 mitzvos. Whether I observe them, don't observe them, I'm falling short of my obligation. But in terms of perspective, I understand what Torah is, what my responsibility as a Jew is, whether I fail or whether I succeed. But what has to be the perspective? The perspective is Taryag, 613. But again, what does 613 represent? That represents emes. The 613 mitzvahs in the totality, that is an embodiment of emes kenei val timkor. That's truth. And that's exactness. Torah is exact. Whether we're exact or not, that's a failing on our part. But what we believe in and what we have to aspire to, we have to aspire to emes. That's what we have to aspire to. And the yardstick is emes. The court, when they judge, if a court is a corrupted court, the liability, consequences, and ramifications are disastrous, are catastrophic. All tragedy comes upon Klal Yisrael because of corrupt courts. Again, the Gemara tells us that why was Yerushalayim destroyed? Because of iniquities and justice. Because delayed justice, whatever it is, in Pirkei Avos, ibus hadin, perversion of justice, delay of justice, whatever it may be, because justice is crucial to existence. V'shul Torah shnikus reishis. Torah is emes. You must have justice. Now it's interesting. God, in His justice, He has mishpat, as the Gemara says. But the court that rules, the court must render justice. Must be emes. They cannot compromise. Unless the defendants are agreeable within a context of monetary to enter into a compromise, into a mediation, the court has to give a ruling which is guilty, innocent. There's no mediation. But let's say we're dealing with something which carries the corporal punishment. And the witnesses, and you met all the criteria of the Torah, the man must be put to death or must be flogged, must receive lashes. The court is not in a position. They have to mete out justice. Justice says, emes says, Torah dictates death. Torah dictates lashes. Torah dictates whatever it dictates penalty. He must pay it. The court are only the conveyors of truth, the processes of truth. But what is truth? Truth is the Torah itself. So this is where I'm going. There's a midrash here. David says in Tehillim, Magid Vorov Yaakov. He tells over his words to Yaakov, Chukov Mishpotov Yisrael. His statutes and his laws to Yisrael. Devar of what is Devar of his words? Elu Divrei Torah. That's the Torah itself. Chukov Elu Midrashos. Those are the interpretations of the Torah. Umishpotov. What's Mishpot? Eladinim. Laws. Lo nosna Kodesh Baruch Hu Torah v'samishpotim el Yisrael bilvad. The Torah and Mishpat and judgment and justice, the laws which pertain to courts, were only given to Yisrael, only to Jews. Where do I know that she's Yisrael? Because we see, the Torah tells us, if two Jews have a conflict, a monetary conflict, we'll go to a non-Jewish court. The Jew is not permitted to go to a non-Jewish court. And if he goes, the Torah says you're in violation of negative commandments. David says, what he gave us, he didn't give to any nation. The mishpatim, the laws are unknown to the non-Jew. So the Midrash says, one of the 7 Noahide laws is they have an obligation to establish a judicial system, which is an equitable judicial system. It's one of the 7 Noahide laws. But what do you mean? They have no relevance to mishpat, to justice. They have an obligation to establish a judicial system as we have. The answer, these are the aspects, the details, the application. These are the fine points of justice. What is justice? When Ben Zakkai was the judge, the chief justice, and witnesses, they have to be interrogated, because that's the only evidence. You could put a person to death. That's evidence. He would ask them, when you saw the crime take place, could you tell me, it was under a fig tree, what was the size of the stems of the figs? Could you identify what kind of stems the figs had? And if they couldn't answer, they're disqualified. There's no such thing. When you're dealing in a non-Jewish court, even a single witness is sufficient. That's adequate evidence. A single witness, a single judge. The non-Jew doesn't even have to be forewarned to be liable for the death penalty. Which is not the case regarding a Jew. If it's a monetary situation, you need 3 judges, 3 qualified judges. You have to have a court, minimally 23 judges. A single witness is not sufficient. They have to be interrogated. All these laws have no relevance to the non-Jew. Kate's both going to say to him, and as the Mishnah says, how do we interrogate witnesses? And each one, minimally certain questions. Now, so the question is, why us? Mishpatim bal yodoim. They have a general sense of what justice is. But what is justice? Is it refined, exact? No. The refined and exact only has relevance to the Jew. Why? Because what is exactness? Exactness is emes. The Jew, who is the dimension of spirituality, has relevance to emes. And that's why God gave us the Torah. And did not give it to the nations of the world, because they have no relevance to this dimension of absoluteness of God. Therefore, what is their evaluation system? What's midas adin? When God metes out justice, it's emes. True justice. When he studies Torah, that's emes. The Jew, chosam shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, emes. God's signet is truth. If that's the case, it's mishpatim bal yodom. Us, we're going to render judgment. It has to be within the context of that, because that is our standard. The standard of the Jew is Torah, which is emes. That's emes kanei val tim kor. The non-Jew, single judge, single witness, not forewarned. Even though the question is, why do you have to forewarn a person before he transgresses? So there's a question, maybe it's lahavchem and shogeg lemezid. It's determined, is he violating inadvertently or deliberately, and he has to acknowledge it. This level of understanding of exactness, that yardstick is the yardstick of emes. We can't enter into that role unless it's within the context of emes. You know, there's always a question. Years ago, they used to debate capital punishment, yes or no. And what was the position against capital punishment? Maybe the man is innocent. Maybe the man is innocent. Maybe you put an innocent man to his death, and you give me 20 examples of people who are innocent because of faulty evidence. People were put to death. The prosecutor wasn't an honest man, and therefore he had to have on his record that he prosecuted so many people. He put people to death. They didn't deserve to be put to death. It's a good question. But yet, according to the Torah, 2 witnesses testify. You interrogate them, the court rules, they evaluate evidence, he's put to death. Nobody's infallible. Every human being is subject to error. So how do they rule? So the Gemara tells us, because there's a posuk, Elokim Nitza B'das Kel, that when the court convenes and they meet all the criteria of what the Torah sets forth, God convenes with that court. The judges, the verdict comes through the eyes of God. They see through the eyes of God. But when do you see through the eyes of God? If you meet the criteria of emes. God only has relevance to truth. If your standard is emes, then God is convening with that tribunal. If it's not emes, he has no relevance to that tribunal. So therefore we could talk about error. You put an innocent man to death. If you meet God's criteria, which is Torah, that's God's criteria. That's it communicated. What's Torah? That's emes. And the judges are qualified. It's very interesting. The Medrash says, "Tzorach shu hashoftim bal lizroa." The judges have to be strong-armed. Now, how do you evaluate a person's strength? His strength of character. He's respected in the community. He's revered in the community. What's bal lizroa? B'masim tovim. Bal lizroa means he has to be fortified with good deeds, mitzvos. Why? They has to have all types of spiritual accolades. Anything less than that, he's not bal lizroa. Because who's worthy of the siyata d'shmaya? Who's worthy of the divine assistance to see through God's eyes? Do you think God associates himself with anyone? You have to be a spiritually qualitative person. So if you meet God's criteria of what spiritual quality person is, then Elokim Nitza B'das Kel. God convenes with that particular tribunal, with that particular bezdin. So the Shoftim have the bal lizroa. B'masim tovim shkachos Moshe vayivchar Moshe anshei chayil. What's anshei chayil? People of power. B'torah masim tovim u'b'gvura. V'tzorch shu nikiyim mikol mishpot. And they have to be above reproach. As the Gemara tells us at the end of Yuma, if a person is a Talmud Chacham, is a Torah sage, and his behavior could be perceived as being misbehavior, although he's doing nothing wrong, that's considered Chil Hashem. So they have to be above reproach. Yunikim. Nobody could say one bad word about him. Well, let him practice what he preaches. His own personal conduct is not what it should be. He's not qualified to be a judge. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God will not associate with that kind of person. He says, I never benefited from you people. Moshe was above reproach at a level which is unheard of. But again, what is this all about? It all has to do with the emes. The only way you could communicate truth and be a model of truth, a role model of what's truthful, is you live a life which you're above reproach, where people see you as a total consistent person. It's interesting. The Gemara tells us in one location, the Torah describes the physical makeup of the receptacle, the vessel which held the luchos, the tablets, the shivrei luchos, and the Torah, which is the oral, the ark, the holy ark. So the Torah tells us when it describes the makeup, it says, it was made of 3 boxes. The outer box was gold, there was an inlay of wood, and the most inner box was made of gold. So it has to be cast in gold from the inside and the outside. And what is the Aron? It's a repository for the Torah. So who's a repository? The equivalent of the Aron? Person's a Talmud Chacham, person's a Torah sage. So the Gemara says that a Talmud Chacham who's not Tochel Kibaro, he's not consistent on the inside as on the outside, what he appears to be, he's not a Talmud Chacham. What is that? He has instant recall. The Torah its entirety. He's not a Talmud Chacham. He's not. You have to be the equivalent of the Holy Ark. Mibaisim mibachutz, tochel kebaro. You have to be as genuine on the inside as you're on the outside. A total consistency. What does consistent mean? That's emes. You could only be the domicile of Torah, the repository of Torah, if what? If you have relevance to emes. If you have no relevance to emes, what all you are is, you're one of these computer software that you can download anything you want under the sun. Has no intrinsic relationship with God. The only one who has a relation with God, and where was the Shekhinah? In the Mishkan. The divine presence was on the Aron, Bein HaKruvim. I will meet you between the cherubs. Why there? Because where was the location of emes, unadulterated truth? The genuineness of Torah, and the ultimate truth, God's truth. That's where it was. So the Talmud Chacham, the Torah sage who has relevance to that truth, he has to be as genuine as a human being can be. No inconsistencies. So if a person, now let's get back. Avo Akevi Yisubeni. Dov was concerned if a person makes a differentiation between a mitzvah kal and mitzvah chabura, between seemingly a less important mitzvah, more important mitzvah. Does he have a consistency? He's inconsistent. I mean, if you're a person doing the will of God, and you're a man of truth, truth says, dictates, if it's the word of God, you must adhere to it. What do you mean you have your own yardstick? My own evaluation system. If it's more beneficial to me, I do it. If not, I don't do it. It's inconsistent. Are you doing the will of God? Aren't you doing the will of God? Evidently, you're not. Because if you would, there's a consistency here. There's a continuum. Why isn't there a continuum? That's a confirmation. That person, so it's not only in terms of prosecution. Based on that, the reality and the quality of that person, that will determine what is his relationship with God. Because of this inconsistency, in God there's no inconsistencies. Famous word I always say from the Maharal of Prague, emes. The smallest, most infinitesimal aspect of it is always identified by the aleph. Aleph is always the smallest. If you take aleph away from emes, you have mem tov. It's mes. Person says, I'm a 99.9999% truthful person. It's not emes. God is truthful in the absolute sense. That's the level of truthfulness you have to have within the context of a human being. Therefore, there's no Baltosef, there's no Baltigro. Ora shelo yokim is divrei Torah. I may have not met the grade, but what is emes? What is the standard of emes? The standard of emes is 240 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. That's the model. That's a modicum. That is the representation of emes in existence. The non-Jew, he doesn't have to have the details. It's beyond any doubt within the human context that the man is guilty. One witness, one judge, even though he wasn't warned. He's probably guilty. We always follow probability. Jews don't follow probability when you're putting a man to death. You have to have two witnesses, interrogation. It has to be to the nth degree, it has to be verified. Why? Why us and not them? Because the Jew was held to the standard of emes, because we were given the Torah, we're endowed with the Torah, and we're only endowed with the Torah because we have the capacity to have relevance to that emes, to that truthfulness. Therefore, the process of judgment has to be within the context of emes, and nothing less than unadulterated truth for that reason. Torah speaks about a situation where the court itself has certain questions within halacha that they're not able to resolve. Or you have a dispute among the courts themselves. Now, how do you resolve a dispute? So the Torah tells us you should ascend and go up to the location which God has chosen. Uvosel HaKohanim, Halavim, Shofet Ashir Bayom Ohem. You were sent to the Temple Mount. This is the location where the High Court, the Sanhedrin Gadol, convened, and they will clarify exactly what the Torah is saying. And that word is the last word. Al pi haTorah sheyirucha, v'osisa al pi hadover she'agidu lecha, min hamokem hahu. And you will do based on what they tell you from that location. This is an important point. From that location. What's that location? That's the Temple Mount. What's the Temple Mount? That's the location of the Divine Presence. That's the Shekhinah. Asher yivchar Hashem v'shomarta lasus kol ashirucha. And you must observe and do whatever they direct you. Al pi haTorah sheyirucha v'al hamisha yomru lecha taseh lo sosim min hadover she'agidu lecha yomru small. You should not deviate from whatever they tell you, not to the right, to the left. So over here the Ramban writes, the necessity of this mitzvah, that you have one representation of law, and everybody must submit to this body, this rabbinical body. He says it's something which is crucial. It's a profound and important concept. Torah is given to us in writing. So we have, it's in its written form, it's finite. We have five volumes, 5 chamoshim. Anything which evolves and is application, you have many opinions and many ways to process information. And as a result of that, everybody has his own vantage point, his own way to see it, his own conflict. There's going to be tremendous disagreement. V'tasa Torah, commentaries, we end up with endless religions. You have this one's religion, our religion, because each one says, this is the way I understand what the Torah is saying. This is the application. V'chotech lo na'kosov din, so the Torah goes and promulgates a law, shenishma lebezna godel ha'omed lifnei Hashem. We must submit and accept the position of the High Court, which convenes before God, in the location which He has chosen. Whatever they interpret and they tell us this is what the Torah is communicating, we must accept. Whether it's part of the tradition, it's transmission, it's based on their dimension of understanding. They say this is what the Torah intends to say, not as you're saying. The Torah was given based on their interpretation. Because we're talking about, they're ordained. They're not just ordinary great Torah sages. They're ordained, and they have the Masorah, they have the traditions directly from Moshe. They're the greatest representations of Torah. So although you may perceive it as they're telling you that your right is your left and your left is your right, you have to, what they say, they are the final word. I'll give you an example. A person, God forbid, has a terminal illness, and he believes it's terminal. The doctor says there's only one chance you could continue living. Very devastating radical surgery. Person's first reaction is, doctor, it doesn't make any sense. What kind of life am I going to live? But when the person thinks about it and realizes this is the expert of experts, and if there's any chance for him to live, it's based on what this man understands. Even if they tell you your right is your left, but why do you see that your right is your left and your left is your right? Maybe you're misunderstanding it. Maybe what they're telling you, your right is your right and your left is your left, but you only think that your left is your right because you think what night is day and day is night. So it's all coming because of your own conflicts of interest. That's why you don't see it right. So to what level does a person have to come? You have to see what they say your right is your right. It's truly your right. If you submit and you're humble, then you understand they are the experts in this area. Nobody's as expert as they are. Ki ruach Hashem al mishorsei migdosho. The Spirit of God is on the attendants of His holy location. Lo yazov es chasidov. God will not abandon those who are scrupulously pious, dedicated to Him. These are the chasidov, the members of the Sanhedrin Gedolah, the members of this high court. Lo'olam nishnu min atos. They're always protected from misunderstanding, from making a mistake. Umin amichshol, and they should not stumble. They have a special divine inspiration, siyata deshmaya. They see things with absolute clarity. Why? Not because they're such one of a kind of a genius. They understand 70 languages, which is unheard of. They're proficient in all sciences and astronomy and everything. Witchcraft, sorcery. It has nothing to do with that. It's because ki ruach Hashem al mishorsei migdosho v'lo yazov es chasidov. That's the reason. The reason why they have such absolute clarity and they're infallible is because God is watching over them. They should not stumble and they should not fail. And He's giving them that one of a kind of clarity. V'loshin Sifri, quotes the Sifri, afil marim beinecho al hayom shu smol. Val smol shul yamin. Even though you perceive it, and you see with your eyes, it seems to be night, and they tell you it's day, it's day. To that degree. Even if you're in full disagreement, you have to submit. Now it's interesting. The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, when he speaks about the people at the time of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, the Navi said regarding them, he's forecasting the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. The Jews are going to be driven to exile. And he says, Omrim al or choshech al choshech or. The people are saying, night is day and day is night. I mean, how can you say day is night? It's clear the sun is shining. They say, Rabbi, you don't understand. You don't understand. It's really day, but it's an eclipse. That's why you don't see the light. Rabbi, you're an archaic Jew. That's why you're not enlightened. That's why the bulb never went on in your head. That's why, you're backward. If a person has enough conflict of interest, so day is night, night is day. Rabbi Chonon, Masmet Zechat Tzarech Levrocha, Hashem Yinokim Doma, in Kovitz Maimorim, in his work, his compilation of various things he said, he writes on Aristotle. Aristotle, Rambam writes, was a level of genius that he was able to come upon understandings that these understandings, a Navi, a prophet, only came upon them because God communicated it to him. So he says, such a level of genius, how could he not believe in God? Looking at this world, seeing the genius of this world, how could he not see clearly that this world couldn't have come about unless it was through a divine being, a monotheistic being? How is it possible? And if Aristotle rejected it, how do you expect a 12-year-old girl, a 13-year-old boy to believe in God? If Aristotle, the genius of geniuses, didn't believe in God, what do you expect of a 12 and 13-year-old child, Jewish child, to believe in God? That's the question. So he answers that Aristotle, despite his genius, but he had endless conflicts of interest. Desires. Those desires were so overwhelming that with that same genius, he turned night into day and day into night. A 12-year-old child, what level of conflict? It's a pure child. Innocent. He has no reason to see it other than the way it is. And if you see it face value the way it is, it's clearly, you see, Ma'rabu Ma'asech Hashem, you see God's fingerprint on every part of every aspect of existence. That's what you see. But Aristotle, because if he would see it that way, he'd be forced to forego all his own inhibitions and his depravedness, whatever he was. He sees it the way he wants to see it. In the most genius way. I once said, the Gemara says that Shlomo Melech, who was the Chochmi Kol Adam, did not marry Bas Paro till his Rebbe passed away. Achi Shiloni passed away, he did not marry Bas Paro. Now the question is, as he justified marrying her, they're referred to as Noshim Nachrios, the women he married, all the wives he took, all the Rambam says, Chas v'shalom, they were converted. But since their intent of conversion wasn't a qualitative conversion, therefore the verse refers to them as no alien wives he took. Foreign wives, almost to be like not Jewish wives. So whatever way Shlomo HaMelech, the Chochmi Kolod, wisest man, justified marrying these women after his Rebbe passed away, with that same ingenious justification, he should have convinced his Rebbe it's permitted, and he could have convinced his Rebbe it's permitted. No, this is l'havdil, that people, they wait till their grandparents pass away before they take another direction in Judaism. Why? Because the grandfather would not approve. Even though you could outsmart them, you could outwit them, you can convince them, but after everything's said and done, you know your Rebbe does not approve. The parent does not approve. Once the parent is not here, once the Rebbe is not here, I could justify it halachically with my genius that it's okay. Not only okay, it's my obligation. But what is that? You may have presented an irrefutable argument to your Rebbe, Ache Shiloni. He says, I can't refute what you're saying, but it's not appropriate. That's the end of the story. Why? Because it's just not appropriate. There's a famous story with the Chazon Ish that Ben Gurion prided himself that he was proficient in Tanakh. And he thought that's being something one of a kind, and he thought he was like a Torah sage. And he comes to the Chazon Ish, it had to do with a certain halachic question. So he said, and the Chazon Ish knew the Torah's entirety. Written, oral, in depth, every moment of his life was fully invested in Torah. So the Ben Gurion, that famous meeting in Bnei Brak, which had to do with the conscription of women into the army, he says to them, but what is the basis for your position? That's what he says to the Chazon Ish. So the Chazon Ish says, Libi Omer, my heart tells me that. You understand what the Chazon Ish's heart was? It was a pure heart. It was a heart that was permeated and sanctified and consecrated with Torah every moment of his life. And because it was that, his heart sensed what truth is. It's my heart. Whatever I tell you is not going to be convincing. Bottom line, my heart tells me that. You could tell me whatever you want. Achi Shiloni, his Rebbe says, Chochmi Kol Odom, you'll present an irrefutable argument, but it's not appropriate. That's the end of the story. That's the end of the line. We have to understand, regardless of what we believe, we have to follow. You can't deviate. Even they tell you what you perceive to be left is right, right and left. We say it's night. They say it's day, it's day. But why do we see it differently? Because we all realize we have conflicts of interest. We have conflicts of interest. We have. And we have mitzvahs kalos that we dosh ba'kevav. We use our own yardstick. What's more advantageous, what's less advantageous? Is it really worthwhile? Yes or no? As I always say, Chizkiel Melch Yehuda, he let the grapes rot on the vine, the most special vineyards, because to him nothing was the equivalent of Torah. For us, he give more charity, you'll be able to study later a little bit more. So we have all kinds of computations why we should not study, we should not do this and that. We're using our own yardstick. How to determine what does God want, what doesn't he want. You know, why don't you go ask a halacha question by a person who's in a position to answer the question. This question, I don't need the rabbi to answer me. I spent my so many years in yeshiva, I'm qualified myself to answer it, okay? What do you have to do is go ask him. Well, you realize we see things differently. But why do you see things differently? What, because he's more extreme? You see him as a more extreme person? When you have a problem, you go speak to him, even though he's more extreme. When you have no problem, then all of a sudden you don't need the rabbi. You don't have to consult with the rabbi. So what is it saying? So this is what? This is not Akev. This is not a person who tramples on mitzvahs with his heels, and everything is his own vantage point and his own interest, and he allows his conflicts of interest totally to dictate his life, 100%. And that's the mitzvah. He says, the Ramban says, since ein adeo shavos, people have different perspectives. If you don't have one body giving you the final decision what it is, you can have endless religions. And that's what happens. Therefore, the Torah introduced the mitzvah that you're bound to their interpretation. We have only one Torah. We don't have two Torahs. And these people, because they have an endowment, the Meshorsei Migdosho, God will not abandon His Hasidim. Therefore, they have a clarity which we don't have.